So without any further ado from me, I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker. Parvez is a senior lecturer in materials modeling and design at the University of Edinburgh, and he has a truly interdisciplinary range of activities and interests, focusing on areas such as comparative biomechanics, biointerfaces, biomimetic design, mechanical metamaterials, robotics, and composites engineering. It's a formidable range of skills and interests. His lab research is aimed towards inspiring the design and development of multifaceted engineering materials of the future. He's a fellow of the RSB and also a fellow of the Institute of Minerals and Mining, and a fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. Tonight, Parvez is going to talk to us about emerging technologies and interdisciplinary science. So may I pass straight over to you, Parvez, and we're really interested to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that introduction. Okay, so when it comes to the title of my talk, Emerging Technologies and Interdisciplinary Science, I'm going to begin on a tangent, just for the sake of context, and I'm going to start right at the beginning being birth. That's one thing that we can all say we have in common. I like to think that we're all born as free-spirited thinkers. Children are in essence boundless in their pursuit of knowledge and understanding. They're not at all bound to any established principles of modern science. Perhaps they're a bit more like early natural philosophers in a sense. And when I say natural philosophers, I do understand that there are different definitions for the term through the ages. Let's just stick to the generic early natural philosophers for now. They study and research the world around them without any prejudice and without any perceived differentiation between what we now know to be disciplines or subjects or fields. This, of course, changes through time, and as you see kids growing year by year, they separate and differentiate more readily, creating clearer boundaries and more defined definitions of the world surrounding them. Both of my own children are adults in their 20s, so I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to see this process of growth and change as a function of age, as a function of knowledge gained, knowledge processed, knowledge understood, and knowledge characterized. This stuff happens, it's human nature. I mean, we basically create our definitions of the world in the way we see fit, and the system we live in channels us and our independent way of thinking. The end result, of course, is a person with finitely discretized packets of information and knowledge that eventually helps them to make better sense of the world in all its complexities. Anyhow, in similitude, using the University of Edinburgh as an example, since I worked there, we began teaching science as natural philosophy in the 16th century. But by the 17th century, we saw specific chairs being created in initially mathematics and botany, and this was followed by natural history, astronomy, chemistry, and then I think agriculture. The Regius Chair in Engineering was established in 1868, and now under the current College of Science and Engineering, we have 7 core but separate schools, these being biology, chemistry, engineering, geosciences, informatics, physics and astronomy, and mathematics. So we've spent all this time, several centuries at least, separating and breaking away from one another. And now, if you look at any of these UKRI funding calls, it seems we once again need to be interdisciplinary. Why is this, and what's happened here? Well, what we have done essentially is we fine-tuned specific areas of science and engineering. We've become incredibly good within individual disciplines, and as each discipline has been maturing in parallel, with a great deal of human effort and focus in all cases, of course, we've enabled new channels by which means we can strengthen each other. Let me give you an example from my own research, and I'm going to focus on one area of comparative biomechanics, since my assumption is that today most of the audience are probably, they have a biological background, though I might be wrong. But yeah, a few years back, my research team and I we started trying to characterize the way in which tree climbing fish, and you did hear that correctly, that's fish that climb trees, how they were actually able to climb trees. And we tried to better understand why they could do this while other similar terrestrial fish were unable to climb trees. The specific fish that was in question is Periophthalmus variabilis. And to enable this research, we realized that we needed to first off find, identify, and capture different terrestrial fish species. We needed to characterize the mechanisms of adhesion and adhesion of the fins themselves to the substrate materials. We needed to characterize the predominant movements that the fish uses when climbing. We needed to understand why and how specific structures in the fish enabled climbing. And we needed to understand how the materials involved contributed to climbing ability. Now, that's a non-exhaustive list, but it does list the major requirements that led us then to draw strengths from a range of different disciplines. For example, we needed ichthyologists to help us determine optimal capture methods, not only for the tree climbing fish, but also comparable fish controls. We needed to understand fish histology and how tissues might influence the mechanisms of motion. We also needed biologists to identify fish using both morphological and DNA barcoding methods. Now, for those of you who are familiar with DNA barcoding, you know that it requires PCR amplification. But this, of course, means that somebody out there had to design and build a thermal cycler, the first of which came to market in 1987. Another area that I mentioned earlier was adhesion and the determination of mechanisms of adhesion. Themselves, they require knowledge about the chemistry at the interfaces between the adhesive, which in our case was the fish slime, and the adherent, which could be the roots of mangroves, the trunk of the mangrove, or igneous rocks, which are comprised of silicates and calcium carbonates. So to determine the chemistry, we need some chemical characterization tools, and chemical characterization tools might include things like FTIR, Fourier transform infrared. They might include Raman. They might include time of flight secondary ion mass spec or nuclear magnetic resonance. These are all complex technologies as well. And these are complex technologies that, in order to help us identify chemical species, need to be designed and built. Now, once you know the chemistry, so that part takes its own amount of time, but once you know that chemistry, you still don't know in which these things actually adhere. So we needed to turn to chemical modeling, which at a basal level requires quantum mechanical optimization of molecular structures for us. So that's basically about the application of partial charges on individual atoms within the molecules. But we also then needed to conduct molecular dynamic simulations. So we need a specialist software for this, and that software is developed by a combination of chemists, physicists, mathematicians, and software engineers who are all working together in order to create this wonderful software for us. But what about the fish movements? Did we only use our naked eye to determine these movements, or did we use high-speed cameras? These are tools that have obviously been evolving since the first video cameras came out in the early 1900s. I myself have a monochromatic camera. It records at around 38,000 frames per second, which sounds pretty high and pretty amazing, but actually that's child's play when you compare it with the more recent Caltech inventions, the Caltech cameras, which I think they record about 1 trillion frames per second, which is incredible. And when you think about it, I guess the next stage with a camera like that, I think it was created or invented in 2020. So the next stage should be improved resolution. But just imagine the possibilities if you have a camera like that. I mean, zoologists could literally shut down the internet if they, for example, put up a slow-mo video of a Dracula ant snapping its mandibles, which I think occurs at a whopping rate of around 90 meters per second. And let's not even start considering how image analysis, wherever you have cameras, There's oftentimes in science and engineering, there'll be image analysis involved as well. But let's not even start considering how image analysis is moving forward in leaps and bounds, with machine learning and artificially intelligent algorithms being front runners in the race to develop higher and higher level image analysis tools. I, in fact, at the moment have a PhD student who's developing machine learning algorithms to enable the instant identification of insects using pattern recognition as a basis for software development. Now, her background is actually in computational engineering, but her entire focus is on creating tools that entomologists can use. And that's a beautiful marriage of disciplines there. You've got computational engineering and you've got entomologists. So you've got software development and software application. What about the structure of the fin, the structure property relationships of the fins and the materials of the fins of this tree climbing fish that I've been speaking about? Well, it's difficult to analyze visually. It's very difficult to conduct any specific form of experiment to understand stress distributions. So what we did is we used the finite element method to develop our understanding of stress distributions and grip potential, therefore. Do take to heart, though, that this numerical method, the finite element method, was originated by a structural engineer called Alexander Renikoff in 1941. It's a method that has now become a vital and highly advanced computational engineering tool, and which we now are using, not just my group, but other groups who are involved in comparative biomechanics around the world, who understand, use this tool to better understand how biological structures work. And of course, it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. So biology equally informs advancements in engineering. I've been coming more from the engineering side because that's my background and applying that to biology, but of course it could work equally in the opposite direction. One good example is synthetic biology, which is a growing field in the area of materials, assembled biofunctional devices and genetic circuits, for example. Biological operations are at the end of the day, they are the best. Cells are the best at manufacturing. They're far superior to anything that we can manufacture at these tiny length scales. Cells and their components, they're also energy converters, they're energy harvesters, they're advanced builders, they're miniature computers, they're miniature production factories, micro defense systems, they're signal carriers, and they're much, much more. The bottom line here is that what may initially for us have seemed like the simple study of a specific fish dynamic ended up requiring our utility of decades of invention and innovation in the form of engineering tools alongside an interdisciplinary team, in the simplest of terms, consisting of biologists, physicists, chemists, and material scientists. So we do need each other. And this becomes progressively more evident as we move into even greater challenges involving, for example, environmental protection, ocean conservation, the repopulation of species, progress in farming and aquaculture, and many, many more areas. So to end, I'm going to give you some food for thought, and perhaps in 100 years from now, we will have gone full circle, and our undergraduates at the University of Edinburgh will once again be graduating as natural philosophers, albeit just under a newer, different definition. Thanks for the invitation today, and thanks also for taking the time to listen to my talk. Probably good if I end there.
Thanks very much, Parvez. I think that's an amazing story, the bringing together of so many different areas. Just one quick question from me, sure. Cheekily. What made you go for the climbing fish in the first place?
I saw them hanging out in the trees, and I thought to myself, well, this is really odd. I was in Semarang in Indonesia doing research on various other organisms, and while in Semarang, we just noticed these fish and thought to ourselves, well, this is highly odd. So we needed to start researching them. And oddly enough, they also hop across the water surface. So they do mini taxis, and then they just hop across the surface of the water, a bit like flying fish, but much smaller hops. So, yeah.
That's brilliant.
They're bionic fish in one sense, aren't they?
A lovely bit of serendipity there. I think that's really great. Thank you very much. And obviously, I hope you'll be able to stay on, because I'm sure that our attendees will have some questions for you as we go along.